On the fourth day of my stay, I decided to go for a jog. The previous days had been filled with introductions to world leaders, celebratory feasts, and all manner of festivities. The Kovani were pulling out all the stops, and I understood why. Back on Earth, I'm sure they were also rolling out the red carpet for the first aliens anyone had ever met. I was fortunate to be part of the initial diplomatic delegation, though in a junior capacity. As an aide to one of the deputy trade ministers, my role was mainly to sit quietly in meetings and carry her belongings. When yet another provincial governor invited us to yet another gala, I felt I'd had my fill. I politely requested to be excused to explore the area surrounding the Astral Citadel. This was permitted as long as I cleared it with the security officer, who had no objection as long as I took the minders along. They were not there to hinder us, but rather to prevent any public embarrassment should we be mobbed, as all humans were treated as celebrities on this planet. I changed into my running gear, grabbed an extra oxygen bottle, and met the two Kovani at the front gate. They did not seem dressed for exercise, but I thought nothing of it, knowing the security officer had coordinated with his counterpart. I stretched briefly, picked a direction, and set off at a leisurely pace, the minders following behind. Partway through my jog, I noticed one of the minders had collapsed. I stopped short and turned back. Had he stumbled? Was there a more serious issue? I didn't know anything about their medicine. He gurgled. A half-second later, the translator kicked in. What torture is this? Huh? The other minder was bent double as something streamed out of his mouth. Are you two all right? I asked. Is this some kind of test? Grunted the bent-over one. I told you I was going for a jog, I argued. A brief pause followed as the minders exchanged glances. Each year, the people here hold a competition to see who can circle the old walls of this city the most quickly, in honor of an ancient hero, explained the one still on his feet. At that speed, you would have easily beaten the record of even our greatest champion. And you say that is slow? Yes, I stammered. My people have a similar event. Our elite runners can run 26 miles in a little over 2 hours. I'm nowhere close to that level. I knew the translator would convert the units to something they would understand. The two Kovani stared in shock. The one on the ground had managed to reach a sitting position. And you engage in this practice for what purpose? He panted. To prepare to flee from danger? Well, honestly, I really just jog because I think it's fun, I replied. For the first time, I saw fear in the eyes of a Kovani. Each ward had long ago chosen 2 colors to mark their circuit uniforms, which remained in use today. Due to the Kovani's distinct tastes, most uniforms appeared garish to human eyes. Fortunately, blue and green were still available. What else could be used for the hat to represent Earth in the upcoming Celestial Marathon? When the head of mission heard about my first run with the Kovani minders, he was horrified. Had I offended our hosts? The next morning, he went to apologize on my behalf. To his surprise, the Kovani simply brushed it off. You humans may be faster than us, said one senior leader, but how high can you jump? The head of mission stammered a response about a few feet. And what of your greatest champions? Another asked. Well, a little higher than 8 feet, he replied. This seemed ludicrously low to the Kovani, whose own diplomatic team had reported the low walls of the compound we built for them near Geneva. With my jogging confirmed as inoffensive, I continued my routine every other day, varying the route to see new parts of the city. The minders were called off, as I could easily outrun any threat. Instead, I became a local celebrity. Kids would try to keep up with me, shouting the nickname the ward had given me, the Joggar, since my real name was unpronounceable to Kovani. After being profiled in the capital's newspaper, I became known across the continent. In meetings I had previously attended unnoticed, senior Kovani now approached me during breaks to speak with me. One such time, a ward elder handed me a sealed silver envelope. Back at the human compound, I scanned the letter and activated the translator. I was surprised to learn I had been formally invited to compete in the upcoming Corvallis Celestial Marathon, scheduled for a month from now. At first, I was inclined to decline. However, word spread, and the entire human delegation became enthusiastic about my participation. Some military personnel offered training tips, the deputy trade mission chief promised new running shoes, and the kitchen staff inquired about my dietary needs for the race. With everyone's encouragement, I felt compelled to accept. I arranged a private tour of the City History Museum to better understand the event. The docent guided me through the exhibit on the Celestial Marathon's history, explaining its origins dating back 3,000 years to a war between the capital and a neighboring city. When the city elders received the news, they grew deeply concerned. With a fully manned city guard, no dark wolf pack could hope to breach the city's walls. However, with only a fraction of the normally available force, the city's fate seemed all but certain. "We must begin an evacuation," exclaimed one elder. "We don't have enough men," cried another. They turned to the current head of the city guard, a grizzled veteran of many battles. The old general, missing a hand and eye, had been left behind to assist in the city's defense. While he commanded respect, his fighting days were long past. The only warrior still within the city considered the problem in silence for a few moments. Then he spoke. "With my men, I can evacuate at most 1/4 of the city before the new night comes. The rest will surely perish." The elders were distraught. How could they choose who would live and who would die? "I shall light the beacons myself," the boy declared. "Let the rest of the guard assist with the evacuation." The senior elder gazed at the sunlight creeping over the distant mountains. "Look, child," he said kindly, "dawn is breaking. Do you truly mean to light every beacon on our wall before nightfall?" The boy nodded. "Why not let him try?" The general shrugged. "Perhaps his efforts will allow us to save a few more." With that, the boy was handed a torch, and all focus and effort turned to managing the chaos of the evacuation. All possessions were to be left behind. There was only room on the ships for women and children. With these commands, the elders hoped to save as much of the future of their city as they could. Throughout the day, the old warrior occasionally paused to try to see how far around the wall the boy had reached. In the harsh brightness of day, however, it was impossible to see which torches were lit and which were not. As the day grew short, it became clear that most of those still in the city would not be able to be evacuated. Desperation gave way to panic. At that point, the sun moved behind a dark cloud for a few moments. "Look!" cried a voice from the crowd. "The beacons!" The old general turned, stunned to see that all but a handful of the beacons were lit. It was a slim chance, but it was the best they had. "This ship is the last," commanded the warrior. "After this, every man to the wall." The city guard hastened to obey. They reached the wall just as the sun set behind the mountains. The final beacon was lit moments later. The night was long and bloody. Several dark wolves still managed to breach the walls, either when beacon fires momentarily went out or where the distance between watchtowers allowed them access. Hundreds of Kovani still died, but the cataclysm did not come. When the dawn arrived, the dark wolves slunk back to their dens in the mountains, and the city still stood. They discovered the astral protector collapsed at the base of the final beacon he had lit. He had succumbed to exhaustion sometime during the dreadful night. For the first time, the aged warrior felt tears well up beneath his missing eye. "Who is this youth?" he asked. "Does anyone know his name?" No one did. Amidst the chaos of war, evacuation, and the wolf attack, there was no one living who could provide any information about him. All that was known was that he had single-handedly saved the city. A funeral was held for him the following week. While not the largest the capital had ever seen, given the greatly diminished population, it was the finest tribute they could offer at the time. The old general dedicated half his life savings to erecting a monument honoring the boy's courage, promising the remainder to anyone who could help identify him. The claim was never made. Eventually, the war was won, marking one of the capital's first steps from being a city-state among many to leading the continent. The army returned home, and the soldiers were told of the astral protector's sacrifice. On the first anniversary of the Dark Wolf attack, when the day was the same length as during the boy's feat, a few dozen soldiers determined to honor his memory by attempting to replicate his achievement and circle the wall between sunrise and sunset. None were successful. The next year, about 100 tried, but the fastest still had 3 towers to reach by the time the sun set. Each year, more and more did what they could to honor the savior of their city. In the 5th year, 1,000 citizens started what had by then come to be known as the Celestial Marathon. For the first time, someone was successful, having trained all year to beat the sun. Another claimed to have finished, but it was later proved that he had cheated by skipping guard towers. Also, for the first time, someone died during the competition, an elderly Cavani who ignored the healer's pleas that he was not up to the challenge. As the event threatened to spiral beyond control, the city's elders intervened. The Celestial Marathon would henceforth be formalized, with each of the city's wards selecting one of their citizens to champion them in the race. Observers were stationed at each tower to ensure all competitors stopped at every checkpoint. Healers and aid stations were set up to safeguard the champions. The old warrior, now on his deathbed, willed that his remaining funds be placed in a trust, with a portion granted annually to the race's victor to be spent for the city's benefit. In the years that followed, the Celestial Marathon continued each year on the anniversary of the day before the Dark Wolf attack, with the 25 ward champions lining up at the tower closest to the docks, their goal to return there before nightfall. The event became an incredibly important aspect of the capital's culture. As the city expanded beyond its old walls, a buffer zone was established around the wall to ensure no development would prevent the completion of the Celestial Marathon. There was great honor in being the fastest champion, and pride in belonging to the ward that had submitted them. The Astral Protector's example of selfless sacrifice without glory had a significant effect on the capital's psychology as it grew into a world power. In more recent times, the event has become entirely secular, yet remains the most popular mass event for the Cavani. Billions around the world watch the competition from the comfort of their homes. A combination of the Super Bowl, World Cup, Olympics, Tour de France, and every other major sporting event. While champions are still restricted to one each from the capital's wards, the Celestial Marathon has become a unifying event, not just for the capital, but for all Cavani. The museum's exhibit contained relics from the Astral Protector, including his carefully preserved torch used to light the beacons. It also held portraits of every champion since the invention of cameras, and artistic renderings of the most renowned champions from antiquity. The city elders had stretched the rules to consider the small human enclave in the capital as another city ward. I had apparently become our de facto champion, the first time there was a 26th. Bearing the weight of history, I altered my routine and began running daily. From Sector 17, Krytoch the Grocer, the MC droned. The day and night before the Celestial Marathon were apparently filled with customary events. The first at midday was the introduction of the champions, a tediously monotonous affair in which I drifted in and out of focus. From Quadrant 20, Kartan the Warrior, he continued. The intel had revealed that this was my true competition, the victorious champion for the last 5 Celestial Marathons. Kartan stepped forward to rousing applause, bowing slightly before returning to the line. From District 21, I zoned out again, gazing at the crowd as Cavani waved banners in their ward's colors, cheering for one champion or another. I couldn't read a single one. From Zone 25, Vizene the banker. As the champion took his bow, I glanced at the cameras transmitting the event across the planet. I'd heard this year's Celestial Marathon was expected to draw a larger audience than ever, with aliens involved for the first time. The formula had apparently grown stale, but the city elders were shrewder than I'd thought. The MC took a breath. And finally, representing Enclave 26, Jagar the. He paused, glancing at me. Humans didn't use profession as their central identifier. Jagar, he concluded. I stepped forward. Hooting and hollering erupted from the 20 or so staff of the human delegation who had managed to attend. Each wore a green t-shirt and blue jeans, the colors we had adopted to represent myself. The rest of the crowd applauded politely. I bowed carefully, ensuring the oversized painted helmet remained in place. That would certainly be an auspicious start to my time on the Cavani Intercontinental Telecast. When we learned at the last moment that I required a hat, an IT enthusiast had hastily crafted this together. I returned to my place. Citizens of the capital, I present this year's champions, the MC concluded. The crowd erupted, each cheering their own champion as loudly as possible. After ceremonial events, the final pre-Celestial Marathon tradition commenced. Shortly before midnight, all champions were sealed in the Astral Protector's memorial. This was the modern continuation of an ancient vigil. We would soon be escorted to the race's starting location, just before dawn. Histories indicated champions used this time as they wished. some praying, others meditating or reflecting. The more competitive may have attempted to unsettle their opponents. I planned to consume snacks and rest on the provided cots, as my superior speed meant completing the celestial marathon thrice, while the Kavani did so once. Roused from too little rest, another champion stirred me. Jagar, the sun nears. The celestial marathon will soon begin. As soon as I was able to focus, we champions were lined up on the wall from one parapet to the next, facing the direction of the rising sun. The first hint of light crept over the mountains, and as one we began to move. My 3 circuits had commenced. Halfway through the final lap, I spotted Kartan in the distance. I'd already passed all the other champions, so I knew he was the leader. I just had to overtake him before the finish to be victorious. While my legs and lungs burned, I could tell I was slowly gaining on him. Every time he passed a tower, Kartan would glance back and see that I was slightly closer. Each time he grimaced, turned back forward, and increased his speed slightly. I was still gaining. With a quarter of the final lap remaining, I was still a tower behind him, but his attempts to pick up speed at each checkpoint now lasted only a few seconds. He was tiring. With 5 towers to go, I was only half a tower length behind him. With 3 to go, I could see he was in difficulty, zigzagging across the width of the wall. I passed him in between the third and second to last tower. Just as I moved by, I heard him hit the ground. I turned back. I could barely see the next champion several towers behind us. "Are you all right?" I asked. "Go on, human," he panted. His appendages were wrapped around the closest thing the Kovani had to an ankle. "This victory is yours." "But are you all right?" I repeated. "My injury is due to overexertion, no more," he replied. "Look ahead. You can see the healers coming from the next tower. I'll be fine. Go claim your victory." "Are you sure?" I asked. "There is no shame in this defeat for me," he said calmly. "I know I've done my best. I have already had the honor of more consecutive celestial marathon victories than any Kavani for 3 generations. Again, go and claim your victory." "If I picked you up, would I hurt you more?" I asked. "Well, no," he said, puzzled. "But I don't see what—" I reached down and lifted him on my shoulders. Just as on Earth, elite aerobic athletes were not generally big, bulky people. He probably weighed about the same as me. The weight was difficult, but I had less than 250 yards to go. I waved off the approaching healers, turned to the finish line, and started moving. Carton was clearly in more pain than he had been willing to let on a few moments ago. "Why?" he grunted. "Does the word sportsmanship translate?" I gasped between breaths. There is a human ethos that it is more important to win well than merely to win. He hadn't gotten heavier in the last 10 yards, but I was also weaker than I'd originally thought. "No," he replied. "Explain." I panted as I told him of the history of the human marathon, of Pheidippides' run in the modern Olympics. I told him about examples from history where competitors had sacrificed their victory for the greater good. With 100 yards to go, the sun touched the tops of the mountains and began to set. The last 50 yards were sheer agony. I'd been moving nonstop for hours. To try to take my mind off the pain, I kept talking to Kartan, babbling about sore losers and good winners, and how the purpose of Little League was really to teach values and get kids outside instead of winning games. Only in the last few steps did I notice the silence. From looking at archival videos, I understood that the finish line of the Celestial Marathon was normally a very loud place, as the audience cheered on their champions from the ground below. This time, I heard nothing. I tottered across the finish line and handed Kartan into the waiting arms of the nearest healer. As they started to carry him away, he reached back and grasped my hand. "You have given me much to ponder, human," he said. Then they whisked him away. The sun went fully behind the mountains. I had completed the Celestial Marathon. I heard later that the elders were dumbfounded by what to do next. Only very rarely in the history of the circuit had there ever been a photo finish. There had never been a tie. There had certainly never been a champion who had intentionally tried to finish at the same time as another. To kill time while they frantically discussed what to do, they sent the MC to do an interview with me as I tried to cool down from the run. He found me pacing in a circle with my hands laced above my head. "Jogger," he said, holding the microphone towards me as the camera hovered nearby. "You are the victorious champion in your first circuit. What would you like to do now?" I paused for a moment, considering my response. I would like to thank the capital city elders for granting me the opportunity to participate in this honored ritual, I said. Kartan competed well, and it took great effort for me to catch up to him. I know the astral protector smiles upon us today. The MC pulled back his microphone and turned to face the camera. We now have an update from the elders, he announced. From atop the wall, I could see the ward elders seated on the platform where the victory award was presented. To my surprise, Kartan was there as well, receiving attention from healers. Jogger the human, the senior elder spoke into another microphone. Would you please join us down here? It took some time, but I made my way down the wall's stairs, my legs still sore. Soon I stood beside Kartan on the platform. Citizens of the capital and Kovani around the world, the elder continued, addressing the assembled crowd and the cameras overhead. For the first time in the history of the Celestial Marathon, we, the elders of the capital, declare that this year we have co-victorious champions. There was a perplexed murmur from the crowd. What did this signify? Jogger the human and Kartan the warrior will both decide what to do with the funds from the victor's purse, he continued. As they reach the end of the Celestial Marathon together, so shall they decide this together. He appeared satisfied with this refined solution. My elders, with respect, I defer entirely to Jogger's decision. Kartan gestured at me. He is the entire reason I am able to be a victor today. Then Jogger the human, the elder had turned to me. How do you wish to benefit the city with your victor's purse? I still don't see the purpose of that ritual, said Kartan. I chuckled. How many times have I tried explaining it to you? I have lost count, old friend, he replied. But I do not see any purpose in stretching, even specifically during the 7th inning. I chuckled once more and redirected my gaze to the field. I could only see the back of my son's helmet in all his catcher's gear, but I could imagine the steely look in his eye as we reached the final inning of this game, with our team up by 1. The pitcher nodded once and began his windup. The ball came so quickly I could barely keep my eyes on it. Say what you will about the Kovani, they could throw a mean slider. Strike 3, called the umpire, this ward's elder. He eagerly pantomimed the hand gestures from the videos he'd requested I send him. You're out. He pointed towards the wrong dugout, then corrected himself. Kartan was on his feet. He didn't know much about the rules, but he knew that when his son threw strikes, it was good for the team. Yes, he cried. Another, just like that. 3 more, I whispered to him. Indeed, the more strikes the better, he replied. The Human Kovani Friendship Center had grown greatly as more recent champions, inspired by my example, donated their victors' purses to expand the facility. What had started as just a meeting hall and small museum of personal items, donated by the members of the delegation, now boasted several buildings and acres of open space, including a rose garden that only survived in this climate due to the careful care of the gardeners. The museum had grown to encompass all of our history as artifacts, documents, and other items were donated from human museums. The visiting lecture series that brought researchers, scientists, and other experts from Earth was more popular than ever. The most recent addition was the Little League field. This year's champion had used the purse to construct the field and to outfit and equip enough teams to form a league. His only stipulation was that, in the true spirit of the center, there would never be an all-human or all-Kovani team. The inaugural game was going well for our team. Kartan's son was a natural pitcher, and he and my son had practiced for hours, until it was as if they shared one mind. They'd become instant best friends ever since meeting as infants at the ceremony where Kartan's portrait and mine were placed in the Hall of Celestial Marathon Champions, and were nearly inseparable ever since. The final batter swung 3 times, but never hit anything. With the game won, my son ran to the mound. He and Kartan's son faced the stands and took a bow as the rest of the blue and green team cheered. I turned to the father standing next to me. Quite a game, huh? Indeed, he responded, and yet another moment in our wonderful friendship. I didn't know if he was talking about him and I or human and Kovani. Most likely both.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.